Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to another edition of Crimes of the Week International. Authorities in the Chilean capital of Santiago say that 4 teenagers are dead this week and at least 3 others remain seriously injured following a terrifying ambush shooting outside of a house party, a crime that is suspected to be a gang-related attack. According to reports, the situation unfolded at around 12:30 a.m. on July 14th, outside of a residence in the city's Quilicura area. At the time, the group of victims, all of whom were between the ages of 13 and 17, had gathered to celebrate the birthday of one of those in attendance. The teens were outside the home where the party was being held and were preparing to have a bonfire when the whole thing took an awful turn. As the victims were getting wood and other supplies together, a car pulled up at the house. Moments later, a group of between 2 and 4 suspects got out, all of whom were armed with guns. One of them reportedly threatened one of the victims before all of the suspects opened fire. More than 40 rounds were allegedly fired, after which the suspects drove off. A total of 10 people suffered gunshot wounds during the disturbing attack, all of whom were rushed to local hospitals. 3 were pronounced dead upon arrival, while a 4th succumbed to their injuries hours later. 3 of the victims are still said to be in critical condition. While little else appears to be known about the situation at the time of this recording, police have already said that all of the evidence points to the incident being the result of a conflict between rival gang members. That being said, multiple family members of those killed have already come out and disputed this, saying that most of the victims had no involvement in gang activity. Currently, no arrests have been made, and the search for those responsible continues. The loved ones of an Australian couple are devastated and heartbroken this week after they were brutally murdered alongside another family member during what was supposed to be a quick stop on a fun holiday trip before returning home. According to reports, 57-year-old David Fisk and 55-year-old Lucida Cortez had gone on an exciting and romantic vacation to the Indonesian island of Bali. Originally, they were planning on flying directly back home to Sydney when the trip was over. However, instead, they decided to extend their journey a few days and stop in the Philippines to visit Lucida's children from a previous marriage. They checked in to the Lake Hotel in the popular tourist city of Tagaytay, deciding they would also take in a few sights while they were there. However, things took a nightmarish turn on the afternoon of July 10th when cleaning staff at the hotel made a horrifying discovery in the couple's room. When they entered, they found the bodies of David, Lucida, and Lucida's 30-year-old daughter-in-law, Mary Jane Cortez, inside. David had suffered fatal knife injuries, while the women had been suffocated. All 3 were discovered with their hands and feet bound. After launching an investigation, local police recovered disturbing surveillance footage showing an unknown man entering and exiting the victim's hotel room before their bodies were discovered. The man was wearing a face mask and dark-colored hoodie. However, when the footage was shown to employees at the building, at least 3 of them said that they recognized him. It was a former colleague of theirs who used to work as a pool cleaner, but who had recently been fired. So far, the suspect's name has not been released. However, we do know that he was arrested on July 16th at his home in a neighboring province. He reportedly turned himself in and offered a confession, stating that he had committed the awful act as a way to get back at the Lake Hotel management for firing him. He claimed that the murders had been totally random and that he had simply entered David and Lucida's room because he noticed their window was open. The alleged killer stole David's watch and shoes, but left all other valuables behind. At the time of this recording, the suspect remains in custody, though the heartbroken families of David, Lucida, and Mary say that they are still struggling to wrap their heads around the senseless tragedy. In an interview, David's 2 daughters, Lucinda and Brittany, said in part, quote, "We have been living and continue to live a nightmare until any of this makes sense. For someone to take our father away from us so cruelly, it just doesn't make sense. We won't stop fighting until we find out why, and we won't stop fighting until we have justice for our father and Lucida." Officials in both Thailand and China say that a 34-year-old man is successfully in custody this week, roughly 2 weeks after he allegedly committed the brutal murder of a Chinese social media influencer as she was traveling across Southeast Asia. According to reports, 38-year-old Chinese social media star Yan Ruimin was last heard from on June 30th when she called a friend to tell him about the latest part of her journey. The 38-year-old had recently traveled through Singapore and Malaysia, and she was now in Thailand. Specifically, she said that she was heading to the popular tourist island of Phuket, where she planned to shoot more footage which she wanted to post for her thousands of online followers. Sadly, she would never arrive. This same friend raised the alarm days later when he was unable to get a hold of Yan. By this time, though, it appears that they were already well aware that something was wrong. Family members of the 38-year-olds back in China had been contacted by an unknown man, one who claimed that he had kidnapped Yan and was now demanding 1 million yuan, or about $138,000 for her return. When authorities were alerted to the possible kidnapping, they launched an investigation and began retracing Yan's steps. It wasn't long before they discovered CCTV footage of her with a man who was later identified as 34-year-old Ma Qingyan. Ma is also a Chinese citizen, and records revealed that he had arrived in Thailand just a few days after Yan. The surveillance video revealed that he had picked her up on July 1st in a rental car, with the two also seen eating together and holding hands. As police continued to follow the footage, something else disturbing emerged. By July 2nd, Ma was now traveling alone. By following data from Yan's cell phone, authorities were eventually led to a rural area in the province of Chachoengsao. Upon conducting a search there, they recovered a burned-out suitcase believed to belong to the missing 38-year-old. Things got even darker on July 13th, when the heavily decomposed remains of a woman were found buried less than a mile away from where the suitcase had been recovered. While an official DNA confirmation is still underway, police have already said that they believe this is Yan's body. Unfortunately, by the time the trail of evidence led to this point, authorities discovered that Ma had already fled the country. Luckily for them, though, the 34-year-old was caught and taken into custody in the special Chinese administrative region of Macau after he was allegedly busted trying to rip off a local pawn shop owner with a fake luxury watch. At the time of this recording, police say that they are still investigating the exact circumstances behind the awful crime, but they say that they do not believe that any kind of larger crime syndicate was involved in Yan's kidnapping and murder. They believe that the motive behind the killing was personal and that Ma acted alone based on the evidence they have recovered so far. Authorities in the French department of Allier say that they are piecing together the aftermath of an awful tragedy this week after a former soldier allegedly carried out a terrifying shooting attack on his neighbors, a crime that claimed the lives of 4 people, including the gunman. The incident took place sometime after 9 p.m. on July 13th in the small town of Espinasse-Vozelle in central France. That evening, a local celebration was happening in the center of the town, where fireworks and other festivities were being held. At the same time, a private party was being held at one of the rural residences, one that was thrown to celebrate the 20th birthday of a resident there named Camille. This latter area is where the disturbing situation unfolded. The party was apparently in full swing, with Camille, his parents, and roughly 20 other family members and friends in attendance. However, within seconds, the fun and excitement would come to an abrupt end when gunshots began to ring out in rapid succession. The man allegedly responsible for those gunshots was a neighbor, identified only as 57-year-old Frederick D. After stepping out of his home armed with a rifle, Frederick reportedly opened fire on Camille and the other partygoers. Upon realizing what was going on, victims and witnesses say that they ran to try and take cover and get to safety. However, Frederick reportedly followed them, walking down a path that connects several of the properties in the area while continuing to shoot at people in buildings. The attack lasted for several minutes until finally it ended with the 57-year-old turning his weapon on himself. Sadly, Frederick was not the only casualty of the horrifying shooting spree. 3 people were killed during the assault, and at least 4 others needed to be hospitalized. The 3 deceased victims have since been identified as Camille, as well as his father and his godfather, both of whom were in their 50s. At the time of this recording, no motive has been confirmed behind the devastating incident. Authorities say that Frederick was not previously known to them, and that they were not aware of any prior neighborhood disputes between him and the victims. However, some, such as the local mayor of the town, have speculated that the attack could have something to do with the 57-year-old's military history. According to several local media reports, Frederick was a former soldier who had served time in places like Afghanistan as a sniper. Other local media reports stated that the 57-year-old was reclusive and known for being antisocial. He had originally moved to the town with his wife, but the pair had separated years earlier. There are also unconfirmed reports about some sort of confrontation that may have taken place at Frederick's home prior to the shooting. A couple of local sources we came across mentioned that someone who was attending the party may have been riding a motorcycle outside of the 57-year-old's home, while others state that Camille and some of the other guests may have gone over to Frederick's house to see if everything was okay after hearing what sounded like screams coming from inside. These same reports state that these screams may have actually been from a first-person shooter video game that the 57-year-old was playing inside his house before the attack, which police later found with the volume turned up incredibly loud. However, so far it appears none of this has been confirmed. The situation is still under investigation. An off-duty New Zealand police officer is being applauded for his amusingly quick and decisive action this week, after he caught a man allegedly trying to steal an expensive basket of groceries from a business, and he shut him down so fast that the would-be thief was left looking visibly stunned. The whole thing happened on the morning of July 9th, when the off-duty policeman in question decided to make a brief stop on his way to work. He needed to pick up something for a fellow officer, so he drove to a Woolworths grocery store in the Auckland suburb of Henderson. Hilarious surveillance camera footage taken from the business shows what happened next. At the exact same time that the officer was walking into the store, a man in a hoodie was trying to head out the wrong way through the business's entrance. He was carrying one of the store's shopping baskets, which he had allegedly loaded with hundreds of dollars worth of meat and other products. Immediately cluing in that the man in the hoodie was attempting to shoplift, the off-duty officer grabbed the basket from the suspect's hands mid-stride and kept walking into the store. It all happened so fast that the would-be thief kinda just stood there in disbelief for a moment before leaving the store empty-handed. At the time of this recording, the suspect's name has not been released, though New Zealand police say that they know who he is and will be paying him a visit very shortly. A man in China may have single-handedly redefined the meaning of the term trouser snake last week after he tried to make it through a border crossing with his pants quite literally filled with live reptiles. The bizarre smuggling attempt was foiled sometime on July 9th, while the unidentified man was attempting to go from Hong Kong into mainland China at Shenzhen's Futian port. After arriving at the border crossing, the suspect got into the Green Line, which is supposed to be dedicated to travelers with nothing to declare. However, it turned out this couldn't have been further from the case. As China's General Administration of Customs wrote in a report about the incident, quote, "Upon inspection, customs officers found that the pockets of his trousers contained 6 canvas drawstring bags that were sealed with tape. Each bag contained multiple live snakes of various colors and shapes. Apparently, it wasn't just a few snakes either. According to officials, a total of 104 of the serpents were pulled from the man's pants, comprised of 5 different species. None of the species are native to China, and at least one is considered mildly venomous. As you might imagine, bringing a big old bag of non-native snakes into the country was not only frowned upon, it was also illegal. As a result, the male suspect is now looking at a prison sentence of up to 3 years, as well as a fine up to the equivalent of about $34,000 US. Representatives from England's Avon and Somerset police say that a 34-year-old Colombian national has been arrested and is facing murder charges after the remains of 2 men were found under incredibly chilling circumstances last week. The disturbing situation began on the evening of July 10th, when Avon and Somerset police were alerted about a man behaving suspiciously near the Clifton Suspension Bridge in the city of Bristol. When officers arrived, the man was no longer there. However, during a subsequent search of the area, 2 suitcases were found close to where he had been seen. When police opened up the suitcases, they discovered that, to their horror, human remains had been hidden inside. They belonged to 2 different male victims. After conducting further investigations, authorities were able to identify the 2 deceased men as 62-year-old Albert Alfonso and 71-year-old Paul Longworth. The men had formerly been a couple and still lived together at a residence in West London. The city's Metropolitan Police Department were brought in to assist with the case, and in the early morning hours of July 12th carried out a search of Albert and Paul's home. The situation there was just as alarming. Inside were even more remains belonging to the 2 men, as well as other evidence that suggested that this is where they had been killed. While few details about how the investigation was conducted had been released at the time of this recording, police announced the following day that an arrest had been made in connection with the murders. The suspect has now been identified as 34-year-old Yostin Andres Mosquera, a Colombian national who had reportedly been living with Albert and Paul for a short period before their deaths. Mosquera was arrested on July 13th at the Temple Meads train station. Currently, a motive also has yet to be released in the case. However, police say that they have found further evidence that Mosquera and the 2 victims were well known to each other before the crime. In addition to living with Albert and Paul, photos have emerged of the men with Mosquera while on a recent trip to Colombia. Sadly, it's been reported that Paul and Albert didn't really have any close family members, though several people who knew them from their neighborhood have since come out to talk about what wonderful people they were. Residents said that they were always polite, friendly, and smiling, and had lived in the area for many years. A neighbor who recently caught up with Paul at a local pub where he was a regular said that the 71-year-old was looking forward to the future. He and Albert were in the process of retiring and were excited for some upcoming trips that they had booked for not long after their bodies were discovered. Right now, the situation is very much under investigation, with authorities saying that they are still looking into exactly how the awful crime unfolded. Mosquera has now been charged with 2 counts of murder and remains in custody. People across the African nation of Kenya are demanding answers this week after the bodies of 9 women were found under disturbing circumstances, prompting the arrest of a man who police are now alleging is a serial killer who could be responsible for dozens of similar murders. The chilling case began sometime on July 12th, when a group of young men made a horrifying discovery in the capital of Nairobi. The men had been hired to search through a former quarry by the family members of a woman named Josephine Owino. Josephine had disappeared on June 28th after leaving home to look for work. Family members had apparently decided to search the quarry, which is now being used as an informal garbage dump, after one of them claimed that Josephine appeared to them in a dream. As the men looked through piles of garbage that day, they stumbled across something truly heartbreaking. Josephine's lifeless body had been hidden among the waste. Unfortunately, she wasn't the only one either. The remains of 8 other women were soon found there as well. Like Josephine, most of the women's bodies had been put into nylon bags which were secured with rope. Some local media reports claim that the number of victims is actually higher, though currently searches are still ongoing and the official victim count remains at 9. As you might imagine, the awful discovery prompted fears that a serial killer is active in the city. This was also the conclusion that police reached, and just 3 days later they announced that they had made an arrest in connection with the case. The suspect has since been identified as a local 33-year-old man named Collins Jumaisi Kalusha. At the same time that police released this surprise update, they also made further stunning allegations. They stated that Kalusha had confessed to killing at least 42 women since 2022, one of whom was his wife. As evidence of these claims, authorities pointed out that Kalusha lived very close to the dump site where the 9 bodies had been recovered, and said that personal items, including clothing and electronics, belonging to some of the victims had been recovered from his home. Specifically, they alleged that geolocation data on some of the deceased women's phones was tied to Kalusha's home and movements. As convincing as all of this sounds, the story has only gotten more complicated from here. For starters, the 33-year-old's lawyer claims that he was tortured into providing a false confession and has publicly questioned the validity of the evidence against him. It seems that the lawyer is not the only one who is skeptical about the actions and motivations of authorities. Many are now questioning the official version of events provided by police, saying that there are loopholes in the case that they have presented. Of particular concern appears to be the fact that there is a police station roughly 100 yards away from where the 9 victims' remains were found last week. This has led to more than a few people wondering how, if Kalusha had been dumping the bodies here for 2 years, that no one at the station had ever noticed. And if they had never noticed or known about the crimes up until now, how were they able to find Kalusha so fast after the murders were finally uncovered? These are just some of the questions that people are now asking. Of course, the explanation behind all of this could be simple negligence. After all, Kenya has been embroiled in a whole host of scandals involving police over the past few years, so this wouldn't exactly be unprecedented. That being said, officers have already been transferred out of this specific post, and officials now say that they are looking into whether police were involved or complicit in the crimes in any way. In the meantime, Kalusha remains in custody as the investigation continues. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.